And the very first thing I want to do is check in with you. I wanted to ask you to describe in one word, what was your experience this time of writing on our discussion board and reading about people's successes and their challenges in terms of communicating in conflict situations. So if you can, please write in your chat box one word that describes your experience. Relatable, encouraging, supportive, solidarity, relatable, empowering, insightful, supportive, enlightening, relatable. Relatable is going to win the day. Relatable, supportive, relatable, empowering. And you know what? Supportive. Crystal, if I may speak for Crystal, Mel, and I, that sense of being supported, feeling empowered, feeling relatable, and in part because of the patterns, as one of you suggested, that we can relate, also cathartic. And we would hope for that too, because you share so many lived experiences. And as we go forward, we would hope that you would have that sense every time of being able to relate, of being able to glean insights, of feeling supported, of feeling emboldened and empowered, and even having a sense of catharsis, like not just me too. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we're headed. So this is our agenda. Very, very short on theory, very, very long on practice. So we're going to walk through three kind of theoretical approaches to communication and together look at 8 communication tools one by one in a little bit more depth. So let's start with a straightforward definition of conflict. Conflict is a disagreement about something of importance to each person or group involved. A disagreement about something of importance to each person. In any conflict, something of importance is at stake. So our leading question is, how do you discuss things that are important, that matter, in a way that builds and maintains alliances? And I thought it was such an interesting flip of the calendar that we are looking at conflict on the evening of the last debate. All right, so let's poll each other. Which statement best describes your view of conflict, just going into this? So we'll drop down a poll, and here, which statement would you most say, yeah, that's what I think? 1, I would rather have a root canal than have a difficult conversation with someone. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. Or, I welcome conflict. It's an opportunity to learn. Or finally, if I avoid conflict, it leads to an explosion. Please pick one. And let's kind of see where we all land on this one. All right, let's take a look at our results. It's an interesting toggle. The early leader was, I welcome conflict, it's an opportunity to learn. But an ultimate statement that got really the most attention was, conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. And I remember one of your colleague nurse managers once said, I don't accept every argument that I'm invited to. And I think that's very much that sense of conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. It's optional. And I hope that by the end of this, that you may not welcome conflict, yet you will view it as an opportunity to learn. So let's remove our poll. Okay. So As in so many cases of topics that we're going to talk about, you have two roles. First of all, you participate in conflict. You model conflict leadership when you're in direct conflict with somebody about information or interests or structure or values or behavior or motivation. And also, you were asked to facilitate or mediate conflict. And in both cases, I would draw your attention to a very favorite Finnish proverb of mine, which is the forest answers you in the way that you call to it, which means that you are always modeling conflict resolution behavior in the way that you behave as you participate in a conflict. And you bring that modeling into your ability to be able to facilitate conflicts between two or more people. Let's have an opportunity to reflect and write in the chat box. So here is what I think is a very interesting example of a success story. And as we read it together, I want you to think about every single thing that you can unpack in what this nurse leader did to resolve this conflict. Here goes. One evening, I received a call from our emergency department medical director about a change in our ED supplies. He was not happy and immediately began yelling at me over the phone. I was shocked and upset over his behavior. As a new interim manager, and I emphasize this is happening to a new manager, I knew I had to have a crucial conversation with him. Otherwise, this type of conflict would continue. I knew I had to work through my own anger before talking to him. I waited a couple of days and thought about the best way to have a conversation with him. I carefully thought about the conversation I would have with him, what I would say, how I would say it, how I would maintain my composure. I wrote down my talking points and even practiced the conversation. So picture her doing this in the mirror. After my cooling off period, I asked him if we could speak privately. We went into my office and I initiated the crucial conversation. I patiently listened to his concerns and asked questions to ensure that I understood the basic issues. I was careful not to interrupt or become defensive in any way. When he was finished, I spoke in a calm manner and acknowledged his concerns. I informed him the supply issue could be easily resolved. Then I proceeded to tell him my issues with the way he had acted on the phone. I was very direct with my words and explained that we were a team, and in order for us to succeed, we must have respect for each other. By the end of our meeting, we had reached mutual agreements that our relationship would be respectful, professional, and goal-oriented. It was probably the most terrifying conversation I've ever had, but one that I really learned from. So let's us learn from this conversation. What were her attitudes? What were her actions? Why was she successful in resolving this conflict? So as soon as you have a thought, write it in the chat box so we can all take a look. She cooled off. She listened first. She stood calm. She took some time. She acknowledged his concerns, didn't respond immediately, fact-oriented, not emotional, listening, gathering her thoughts, thought about what she really wanted to say, calm, factual, taking time to debrief, letting him speak first, waited to gather more information. She cooled off, addressed the concerns with facts and not emotions, got her bearings, didn't react. She was respectful. She was focused. She established that common ground of needing to have respect for each other. And these are really such essential points. The fact that she cooled down and she realized, and also I want to put into this, she realized that she needed to wait. She realized that she needed to prepare. As someone added in the chat, didn't react immediately. And in one of our leadership labs, we're going to talk about this kind of self-regulation. Also, as someone points out, she had the conversation not when she was angry and not when she was in public. She had the conversation in private. And there was a real sense of listening for the facts first, and then drawing a real clear boundary about the way that he could or could not talk to her and what was acceptable behavior. And finally, as you point out, she came to the common ground. We want to succeed, and we will succeed if we're our team. So thank you for those comments. I think you really nailed it. And this is an example. And look, you know, we put our success examples up here, and we can try every technique here, and we don't always succeed, and it's not always sunshine and unicorns. At the same time, these are the really stellar exemplary behaviors that you have pointed out that can help us move forward in a conflict. Right. Here's a screenshot of so many different communication challenges that you brought up on our discussion board. Performance expectations not met, accountability, physician behavior or provider behavior, good nurse, not so good colleague, managing at the speed of change, conflict with a supervisor, team member going rogue or talking behind your back, conflict between departments, tensions with and within the support staff, trying to sustain a conflict that you think you've resolved, but somehow keeps on creeping back into the building. Negativity, of course, team members or physician assistant or provider, team members without self-awareness. The big issue that was a very strong thread through what you wrote is, now how do you know when it's a time to coach or it's time for corrective action? And I think that's a really important question to always have in mind. The techniques that we talk about today are clarity about defining in discussing and stepping into a conflict arena with the hope that the relationship can be maintained. And yet, in the background, there always has to be the question, is it time for corrective action? Have I coached enough? Have I used all these 8 techniques that we're going to talk about? And now is it time for something else? Again, conflict between new and longtime nurses. And as has been, I think, a theme during many of your postings, the lack of support for your leadership or authority and issues that come up in conflict around that. Right. So let's talk briefly about 3 theoretical models that exist in the field and then move to a really practical approach. Emotional flooding comes from the classic work of Daniel Goleman. And if you haven't read it or you didn't read it in school, do read it. And one of the concepts that's always stayed with me over the years, and I have felt it so many times, is the idea of emotional flooding. And this is when you or I or a team member are stressed by conflict. And what happens is there's a kind of a battle between 2 parts of your brain. Your amygdala processes stress, and then it takes over from your cerebral cortex, which is your problem solver. And when that happens, you bathe your brain in cortisol. Your body is flooded with stress hormones, and you're ready to fight or flee or freeze. And this is what happens when we're emotionally flooded, and we all know these feelings. For some of us, we avoid. It's a flight. We ignore the problem. Well, maybe it won't happen again. Maybe she won't say that. Maybe you won't do that. Some of us, when we're emotionally flooded, we fight. We attack with words and accusations. And others of us go for the passive aggression, which is what I call fight plus flight. So you avoid direct confrontation, but you manipulate and express your anger through triangulation, which we'll talk about later, meaning, do you know what she said to me? Or through sarcasm, a very popular passive aggressive technique, or through the silent treatment. Sometime last year, I talked to a nurse manager who said that another nurse manager she knew of had not talked to her team for several weeks. All right, that's emotional flooding. That is emotional drowning. Right. A second approach that comes from the work of the Harvard Negotiation Project, getting to yes. And the central idea here is keep the relationship as the first priority. So keep the person from the problem separate And that's certainly what happened in the success example that we looked at together, is your colleague talked about the problem. She didn't say, you're so rude and you're not a team player and you don't care about us. She kept it separate. She listened first, she talked second. And there's that sense of the importance of what we talked about in motivation is listening to understand, not just to reply, listening to their why or why not, finding that common ground. As in our success example, the common ground was we have to work together for our patients. We will be more effective if we're a team. That's our common ground, and being able to explore those options together. In a third and final area, and I think this is quite interesting, in that classic book, Difficult Conversations. And the point made here is that in a conflict conversation, there are 4 conversations, and 3 of them take place inside your head. They're inner homework. So preparing for the difficult conversation, as you remember our colleague did, is one is the what happened conversation. Where does my story come from? Where does your story come from? How did each of us contribute? What's the impact that this had on us? The second conversation is what am I feeling? In our first success example, your colleague knew that what she was feeling was angry and out of sorts and irritable, and knowing that before she could have this conversation, she had to work through that. And 3 is an important piece, that identity conversation. What's at stake for me? And so many times in conflict, there's the sense of I'm not being respected, or people aren't putting my authority in front of them. They're going behind me, right? So that's the inner homework. Then there's the 4th, which is the learning conversation, engaging in the conversation. So exploring both stories to discover the differences, listening to acknowledge, restating how the person sees it without agreeing, and then trying to generate options that meet each person's biggest concerns. So keep these frameworks in mind, and we want to get really, really, really specific now. Okay, I see that we lost my screen, so let's get it up here again. Okay, here we go. Good. I want to give you some quick and dirty, and I think really effective ways to think about how to inflame or contain conflict. Here we are. So first, in order to get a conversation going, if you want to really inflame it, you assume the worst about the other person's motives and values. If you want to contain it, we go back to assuming positive intention. If you want to inflame a conflict, define it in terms of we're on opposite sides of the world. If you want to contain it, define it as a mutual problem. You want to make it harder, keep restating and repeating your point of view. If you want to move with progress, restate their point of view and their feelings about the issue. If you want to insist on your own values and dig in on your concerns and needs, you won't get as far as you will if you focus on shared values and interests and needs that you both share, that common ground. And here are 2 of the biggest ones. Can you speak in specific terms? Can you talk about the behavior instead of the person? Because if you focus on the person and not the behavior, the person will be very defensive. If you say, you're not a team player, no one will say, I know you're right. I think about that every night before I go to sleep. What you want to say is, today when I asked for volunteers for our group that we're building, I noticed that you weren't interested, right? That's a behavior. Right? And finally, the biggest way to blow up a conflict is to explore that conflict in public rather than in private. And as one of you pointed out, in our success scenario, it was the waiting to be in private. All right, we're going to do our very first raise your hand, 1 minute on the microphone. Right. So our consultation is called Excuses, Excuses, and you will see why. One of my employees is often late. She can't manage her job on time. In addition, she failed the certification examination. It is common to fail the examination, and it is possible to try again. On the other hand, it is uncommon to blame others for that. She told me she failed the examination because she had to do the test in a hurry. She had not gotten enough time to prepare. Actually, she came late to the test, and she got more time to prepare than other employees. She has all kinds of excuses for her problems in keeping her schedule. For example, the PC works slowly, or her password doesn't work. And then she had to use a laptop at work and the screen was too small. Or sometimes the PC is occupied and she doesn't want to use the other PC. She explains that she is late because of her children or her pets. They pay attention to her in the mornings. Of course, the reason might be the awful traffic, or her car is broken down, and so on, right? So excuses, excuses, excuses. How would you handle this situation? So what we're going to do is take about a 2-minute time period to reflect, to read this and think, if you got this email from one of your nurse leader colleagues, what advice would you give them? How would you advise them to get started on what's a long-standing problem, excuses for, everything on this employee's, staff member, team member's plate? So let's just have 2 minutes of quiet contemplation. And when you have an idea of advice that you would like to give, raise your hand and we'll be able to not only hear you, but also to see you. Take another minute or so to collect your thoughts. And when you have an idea that you want to pass on, raise your hand and we'll be able to recognize you. All right, let's hear from you. What would you want to advise a colleague in this situation? And here the situation is a team member doesn't manage her time well, has an excuse for everything that doesn't work out. This is a long-standing problem. Where would you start? What would you want to suggest? So raise your hand. I think Crystal will find you. Is that right? Okay, good.
I will. And you can find the raise your hand button if you click on the participant tab and open that. You should see a little blue icon to raise your hand.
Crystal, if people just raise their hand like this, are you able to see them?
I cannot in my current view, but I do see, it looked like someone had their hand up. Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I feel like I know you because I've seen so many of your videos. So I would suggest, can we talk to the employee and ask her if everything's okay? When I look at this, it looks like perhaps there's something else going on, maybe something at home, or it looks like maybe there's something going on in her personal life that's bled into her professional life.
So one thing, and Lisa, I think you really underline in your suggestion, this idea of positive intention. So a lot of us would look at this and kind of go, wow, what a BSer, basically. And your good intention is to say, you know what? there's so much going on. There are so many excuses here. Can I have a conversation with her, a general conversation about what's going on? And is the hope, Lisa, that if that happened, that she might somehow talk about some things that made it difficult and you might be able to circle back?
Well, I was just thinking maybe she, maybe there's something going on in her home life that we could, as leaders, provide resources for, like employee assistance or, even work accommodations. Just something to, it's not all about the performance. Like, we care about you as a person. Is there something else going on that we can address?
Okay. And so the suggestion that Lisa's making to all of us is, yeah, there's a performance issue, but we can also think about it as a potential need for support issue. Thank you, Lisa.
We have 2 Jessicas with their hands raised. So let's start with Jessica Meyer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Jessica. What's that hospital front behind you?
I am actually not sure. It's just pulled off of what our Zoom backgrounds are.
Cool. Okay, great.
So,
Okay.
and it's not that warm outside. It's like raining and cold right now. So I'm not
Okay.
outside.
I can stop envying you. I'm in Seattle. Okay. Jessica Meyer, what are you thinking?
So this scenario kind of brings me to, I don't know, we don't know much about the manager, but if she's relatively new in her position, maybe she just needs to set clear expectations for her staff. Like, follow the facilities, guidelines and expectations regarding values and, just behavior, and start kind of a clear slate with her, and then hold her accountable to those expectations going forward.
Okay, so what you'd like to do is have a general conversation about expectations. And you're also wondering, with a kind of generous heart, maybe she's new. And if that's the case, maybe we can lay down some of this information. So sit down with general expectations, and this would be an umbrella over getting things done on time, being accountable in work. So that might be a first step. Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Jessica. I hope you have better weather later today. And we have another Jessica.
I doubt it. I'm in Minnesota.
Okay. Okay, and we have another Jessica.
Hi, I actually lived this entire situation not that long ago as a newer, when I was new to this management position. And it was a lot for me about level setting expectations, like the other Jessica said, in addition to actually seeing if potentially another shift would work better for her work-life balance.
Okay, so you're taking into account, in a sense, taking further what both Lisa and Jessica said, is the sense that, maybe there's something in a bigger picture there, and I can work with her on that work-life. Maybe it's work-life balance. Maybe we can work on that. And then the second piece is having a conversation about expectations. Now, Jessica, let me ask you, with that kind of a situation, did you address the specific behaviors? For example, the being late, or I don't know what the specifics were with that employee. Did you talk about the specific behaviors?
I did. I outlined them all. And when the question was, I'm not late, I actually pulled out their time card to show that they were late, because I'm not that late. I wasn't that late, but I had obviously the documentation to support it.
Okay, so within the framework of kindness and generosity, of maybe it's a work-life balance issue, you also were really a fact finder and a fact demonstrator. And let me ask you one other question. When you're doing that, how do you keep this person from feeling overwhelmed by the evidence?
All in the way you present it.
Okay, so tell us about that.
So I said that I know you've been late, and well, that's what my colleagues are saying. I haven't been that late. It's only a minute or two. So I explained, well, no, I know it's more than that. And they asked why. And I said, well, I can show you how I can tell. And I do it with all of the employees, and I keep track, and you're consistently on the list. And then I showed them how I can see the time card punches. And that's how I know that it's true facts. That's when you punch, not hearsay. You were late.
So that's the combination in approaching this problem of a larger approach. What's going on in this person's whole life, along with how this person is not meeting expectations in this work life, in this work setting, right? Thank you for that, Jessica. And we have one more.
One more, Wendy.
Okay.
Hi, I'm in Nashville with all the road closures for the debate tonight. I'm not for sure if I'm even going to make it to the house.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I'm glad you're with us, Wendy.
they told us at noon that they was starting to close the roads in Nashville for everyone to come in for this.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I had this example, but I am the manager of an advanced practice group, so we do not clock. But we do have expectations of arriving to work on time. And so that's challenging. I do not have that ability to look at a stamped on a time clock to prove that this person, was consistently late. But she used the technique of deflection quite skillfully, trying to deflect the reason why she was late.
So what did you do?
Well, when she said, like the excuse that I remember the most is, well, I had to stop and get gas, and you didn't want me to. If I didn't do that, I'd run out of gas, and I would have been a whole lot later. And I said, no, but I do expect you, when you need to stop and get gas, to leave your house 10 minutes earlier, like everyone else does, so that you still arrive to work on time, even though you have to stop and get gas.
So Wendy, what I want to underline is that even in the face of deflection, you stuck to the facts and you didn't get rattled. And that's an important piece of that too. Okay, so Lisa, Jessica, Wendy, thank you for your thoughts. And it's so good to see you. So good to see you. Okay, so let's move forward with some specific techniques. And we're going to go through all 8 of these one by one. And let's start with teaching people how to treat you. I have a friend who's a colleague and a friend who's a former NFL football player. And he said, my grandma taught me you got to train people how to treat you. So I was looking up Eric Bowles one day and I came across this expression, teach people how to treat you. There were 400,000 entrance about it on Google. And I realized that the original person that said it is Maya Angelou. And I know you might hear that Dr. Phil said this too. At any rate, setting boundaries, training people how to treat you is very important in a conflict. Very important in a conflict. And let's take a look at this one. When I started my new role, I had a provider who was notorious for yelling and belittling others. Early in my transition into the role, he was throwing a tantrum in the clinic because he was running behind. I came out to see how I could help. He started yelling at me and threw a stack of papers at me. I calmly replied, "You will not yell at me, and I am not picking those papers up. I'll be in your office to discuss your concerns and help develop solutions when you're ready." I left him standing there with his jaw on the floor. He met me in his office and said, "I wasn't yelling, but I'm upset about X." I explained to him that I understood and wanted to help, but his actions were creating barriers to my ability and desire to do so. He then sat down and calmly explained what was happening. I was able to solve the problem within a few minutes and created a solution to prevent it from happening again. While he still overreacts on occasion, he's never spoken to me in that manner again. And we now have a very collaborative relationship. I am able to call him out on his behavior and he corrects it rather quickly. This is a classic example of teaching someone how to treat you. You will not yell at me. I will not pick up things that you throw on the floor. And further, she actually went to a kind of a common ground. I understand your situation. I want to help. We've got a common cause here. And was very successful and changed that relationship. Being able to set a boundary and show someone how they can or cannot, in this case, treat you is essential in resolving hot conflicts. Untangling your assumptions is another huge piece of approaching a conflict. And the truth is that all of us assume that we know what people intended by the way it impacts us, why it has the impact it has on us. And so when we assume the worst, we accuse the other person of bad intentions and create defensiveness. I was thinking about a story that I heard it was a couple months ago about a manager in the ED, and he was very upset with the respiratory therapist because he had asked the respiratory therapist to ambulate a patient and do a pulse ox. And this nurse came to the nurse manager and said, "Oh, well, I asked him to do it and he just rolled his eyes at me. And he's been really strange all night." And so obviously the person that had the eyes rolled at her and felt that her colleague was behaving strangely, that was the impact. So the nurse manager went and found the respiratory therapist, found out that in fact, he had lost a family member that evening and was certainly feeling sad and out of sorts. And secondly, when the nurse had asked him to do a pulse ox, he rolled his eyes because he had left it upstairs. He had left his equipment upstairs. And so there needed to untangle that assumption and get on the same page together. So we have to be able to ask ourselves, what did the person actually do before we get our back up? How did this affect me? And based on the impact, what am I thinking the other person intended? Right? And that becomes an important piece. Here's a great one that comes from you. Before I was in a leadership position, I was a labor and delivery nurse, and I worked night shifts. There was a charge nurse, and she and I didn't always see eye to eye. I always thought she gave me the bad assignments or the most difficult patients. I always thought she was giving me the worst work because she didn't like me. I pulled her aside one night that we were working, and I told her I wanted to clear the air with her and hope that we could be cordial with each other. She let me know that she gave me the most difficult patients because, drum roll please, she trusted me and she knew that the patients were in good hands. This was not a situation I diffused by myself, but I wanted to start the conversation, and it ended up helping me grow and being beneficial. So you see what happened. She was getting the really tough assignments, and what she thought that the charge nurse intended was she didn't like her, so she was going to give her the tough work. In fact, what it was is that this charge nurse saw her as incredibly competent and trusted her with some of the more difficult patients, knowing that they would be in good hands. So it becomes so important for us to untangle our assumptions and not just look at how we were affected by it, but what this person might actually mean, what their intent might actually be. To untangle your assumptions, put a little bracket like a parenthesis around what you think. And maybe your view is only one explanation. There's a wonderful practice. It's called the Iroquois Rule of 6, where when you're in a conflicted situation, of course, you'll have a very quick and dirty explanation of what you think is going on, and then try and come up with 5 other explanations for it. Now, that's a pretty heavy lift. I'd say 2. See if you can come up with 2 other explanations. And avoid generalizing from a single behavior. So the respiratory therapist is rolling his eyes. That doesn't mean he's a sarcastic human making fun of you every minute that he has. And in fact, it turned out it was because he left something upstairs. So avoid going from that single behavior and share the impact. Find out what's going on, as your colleague did. Now, I want to clear the air with you. I seem to be getting really challenging patients. What's happening here? And instead of finding out, yeah, well, you know, you're a tough customer, so I'm giving you the tough customers. It was, you're really competent and I trust you with some of our most difficult patients. You can challenge your assumptions with perceptual positioning. And this is something that comes from anthropology. So 3 perspectives. How do you think and feel? How do you imagine the other person thinks and feels? And then what a fly in the wall, or I guess on Mike Pence's head, might see just as an observer. Let's revisit listening, mirroring dialogue. It's that sense of in a conflict. So many nurse leaders have said to me, well, he came in or she came in, it was so difficult, and all I did was listen, right? All I did was listen. Is sometimes you have to be the ear that lets them hear themselves out loud, because it feels good to be understood. When you can paraphrase, when you can state how the other person might see your view, and sometimes in a conflict, you can use this in a humorous way. You're gathering your team together and you're saying, just when we thought we had the last set of changes now, here comes Wendy again. I know that's what you're thinking. Here comes Wendy and she's got another bright idea, right? So sometimes you can just mirror what you put their words in your mouth with humor, and it conveys the sense that you understand. Let me go back to this slide. It feels great to be understood. What does it feel like? So you say to someone, so you think my decision was unfair? Now, if someone says to you, you're not being fair, of course we're going to say, yes, I am. I went through this whole process. What would happen if you just said, so you think my decision was unfair? The other person, yes, I think you should have given me a chance. There we are. That's that working alliance. When you listen to understand, people feel like you understand them without advising them to feel differently, without questioning their feelings. And it increases their understanding of their behavior, helps them cope. It's a relief when someone simply states how you may be feeling. So you think my decision was unfair. It can help a person feel less angry, less isolated, invite them to sort it out along with you and keep that alliance strong. Two little conjunctions, and but. And is a statement of inclusion and acceptance, and but is a statement of denial and discounting. So what we tend to say is, well, I know you're not happy about this change, but it's going to happen anyway. What would happen if you said, I know you're not that excited about this change, and so I know it will be hard for you to work on this committee? When I was in Finland on my Fulbright grant, I found out that the Finnish word for and is ja, and the Finnish word for but is mutta. And so you really get that feeling when there's a mutta in your sentence, all the person's going to hear is what's on the other side of the but. They won't hear the first. So notice as you go out back into your work and home, how many times we say da 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 da, but, as opposed to da 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 da, and. It makes a huge, huge difference. Right? And now we come to the whole notion of and technique of unpacking behavior. And I talked about this earlier. You want to avoid a generalization. You're always late. You're never on time. The entire time you worked here, you've never done this. No one will say, yes, I know, you're so right. What you want to do is speak in the first person, to do it in a pretty timely way after the event happens, and to communicate specifics, a specific time, a place, a behavior, how it made you think or feel, and what you would prefer in the future. So let me show you what this would look like. This is an ancient model that I can tell you that since 1990, I have been using this, and I would still, if I was going into a difficult conversation, write this out for myself, which is describing the behavior that's a problem when it happened. Yesterday in the meeting, you interrupted me several times. Express how you feel, like why it's a problem, and don't say you, say I, say, when that happened, it interrupted my train of thought. And it was hard for me to pick it up again and go forward. Request a specific change in behavior. In the future, I would prefer if you would keep your comments, not offer your comments until I'm done offering my comments. Now, some people like to add a little encouragement, like, I know if you can do that, we'll both have an opportunity to express our strong and important opinions. However, a lot of people just do DER, describe, express, request. And what's important, if you go back to the person who had all the excuses, you probably can't say all you do is make excuses. You can, however, engage, as I think that Wendy talked about, and I think, I'm not sure Jessica did too, the specifics about, yes, there's a problem with your being on time and it happened on Tuesday, right? And it's frustrating for me because I need to have the whole team gathered at a certain time. So in the future, when we have these meetings, I want to see you be able to be on time with us. That's the specifics. That's the not generalizing, right? And then there's the importance of the word I. You are always so negative. Now look, we all read the discussion boards. There are many people to whom we could say, you are always so negative. And no one will say, I know. What you can say is, this morning I noticed you were shaking your head when we talked about shared governance. I was frustrated because I was trying to get the group excited. The only time you said you is when you described a specific behavior. And was the person being negative? Yes. Are they often negative? Probably. Do you have a chance of getting them to change your behavior if you put it that way? No, probably not. And being able to say, I noticed a specific behavior, you were shaking your head. I was frustrated. I was trying to get the group excited. And so you might add to that a request. So if you've got some concerns or issues about shared governance, let's talk. Let's make a time together to sort this out. So here's what this looks like in a diagram. Let me see if I can move this. Okay, Crystal, I'm not able to see this slide because people's faces are right across the top of it. Can we make it diagonal instead of horizontal? Are we able to do that?
You can. You have to touch, you should be able to grab everyone's faces and drag them across your screen.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, that'll work for this. Okay, so here's the problem. A new manager is in a position where every time they're rounding, they hear this person talking negatively about the patients or the workload. And this person works really hard, but the other day they heard the remarks. And so how could you approach this person? So here's a DERE. After the huddle, when you were standing at the nursing station, I heard you talking about how demanding Mrs. R had been. Express. I felt concerned because I thought other patients might hear you or that your comments might affect the attitude of patients as well as the people who are working with Mrs. R. Request, in the future, I would like you to express your complaints in a private setting and to me directly. If you want to add a kicker, I've heard so much positive feedback about you from patients and staff, and I know if you can do this, you'll continue to grow as a team member. You might just want to do the first three instead of saying, you're always standing at the nursing station talking about our patients. You really need to stop. This is really specific. I saw you talking about one patient, and that's the beauty of this model. One behavior, one expression of how you think and feel, including maybe how it makes other people on the team feel, one request, and if you feel like adding an encouragement, to go for it. Finding common ground. Can you find in a conflict at least one point of agreement? A common mission, shared values, an intention that you both have, even what you hope won't happen, or what you're hoping for as a best outcome. And that sense of being able to find something in common ground. In our earliest success example, the common ground can be just as simple as, I want us to be able to work together to deliver the best care for our patients or for our team, or our working relationship is so important. That's one thing that you can both agree on. So let's take a look at, let's do a lightning round, a 1-minute write-in. And this is a situation where there really is not common ground. I've been in my new role for about 6 months. My one supervisor was hired by the former unit director right before my transition to the unit. We've been working on creating a vision for the unit so the staff can understand the expectations and be on the same page. This supervisor and I seem to really differ on what we feel the vision should be on the unit. She tends to dig in her heels in the ground on certain issues and cannot see why I would want to change something when, quote, this is the way we've always done it. I sense that the unit is starting to see our conflict and it's putting tension on the staff. I want to be able to work with her and still make the necessary improvements for a successful unit. And so your colleague is asking, how can I build a relationship with the supervisor when we have different visions? How can I find a middle ground for us to come to? And one of the things that you'll see here, a theme, is that part of the difference is a push against change, and the sense that your colleague is willing to look at certain issues that may need to change. And her colleague is saying, what was wrong, basically, what was wrong with the way we used to do it? All right, so as soon as you have a thought, write in the chat box some ideas, some advice that you would like to give to your colleague about finding that common ground. How are they going to find middle ground? They're pretty far apart. What are your thoughts? Start with talking about the end goal and try and work from there. And that's a great, my colleague Stephen Covey would always talk about begin at the end. So if you talk about where we're trying to go and work from there instead of where we are, which is we seem to disagree about everything. Focus on organizational goals and not just personal ones. Have a brainstorming session together. Maybe building a relationship, creating alliance by spending some other kind of time together where you're not just grinding on the issues at hand. See some more ideas. Even brainstorming about a common goal. You know, there was the idea of brainstorm. What about, what's one thing we can agree on? And let's kind of work from that common positivity. Listening to each other's thoughts with an open mind, small changes, positive outcomes they can both agree upon. Let's see what else we have here. Discussing each person's goals and values, and certainly the hope is there would be some common ground. Being able to meet someone where they are and engage them. Again, end goal, focus on compromises, open-minded, listening, trying to find ways to accomplish a positive aspect. And there's a real underline here of at least finding one thing to build upon and work from that as a positive moment, kind of a high point template to work from. Meet with her in private, explain a vision, include her ideas in setting priorities so she feels involved. It's very important for this person to feel like an agent in changes if they're there, coming together on similarities, rowing in the same direction with a common goal, sitting down, maybe making lists on both of your concerns and seeing what comes up twice, finding the common ground, focusing on goals, assuming positive intent. And I think there's a piece here also of recognizing that she has been a prior manager, and it may be, and I'm reading between the lines here, Nancy, there may be that sense of maybe this is an identity issue, like, well, what about the fact that I really know about this stuff and you're new? Finding commonality of the vision, getting time to know each other, open mind, meeting privately, discussing each other's ideas, and again, finding that common ground and actually asking about it. Is there one thing that we can agree on? Having two lists. What are two things on our top 10? Let's start to work there. Getting to know each other as humans, as my daughter would say, and always looking for that one point to build from. So thank you for those thoughts and that sense of being able, overall, that sense of being able to agree on what's most important, finding that common ground. Right. Now let's talk about the triangle. This is so frustrating. You know what it is. Jessica says to Cheryl, do you know what Barbara's doing? Right. And Cheryl thinks, have you talked to Barbara about it yet? And one really great question from a nurse leader I included here, If employees can't settle conflicts among themselves, how are they going to help patients and families work through their struggles and work through new or chronic medical conditions? So stepping out of the triangle means just this. Whenever there's a tension, that's you at the top of the triangle. At the bottom are two people or two groups in conflict. They will always, let me underline, they will always want you to resolve the situation. And guess what? If you're good at it, they'll ask you again. And so I want to tamper with your beliefs a little about mediation. And I really want to encourage you to encourage them to be directed toward each other. I have collected 3 examples of this, and I want you to think about which one will really be helpful for you. Here's one. I'm often challenged with the conflict of empowering staff to address their peers. I find myself listening to staff complain, he's lazy, she doesn't complete orders. I feel as though the message would have more gravity if it was peer-to-peer. So they want me to address it. I encourage staff to address their peers. I give them communication ideas about how to do it. I feel the team can be stronger if everyone is accountable and works together. Second example, I find myself asking, have you spoken with the individual about what you're feeling? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. This is frustrating for me to hear because peer-to-peer feedback is received so much better, helps build a feeling of trust and respect when it's done professionally. And this last one I think is a real kicker. Anytime one group brought a complaint to me about the other, I only gave one response, which I learned from my kindergarten teacher friend. I say, and so what did they say when you told them that? This statement facilitated the groups to address their conflicts directly rather than using me as an intermediary. Right? I want to make the point that there is a time when you can be a useful intermediary, and that time is after you have stepped out of the triangle initially. Right? So someone comes to you with a problem, you can't just immediately say, go talk to them. You can say, yeah, so you feel like he's being sarcastic, or you've really had it up to here with her, or you felt that she was being unfair. Then redirect them. And you may be able to coach and rehearse with them using that DER model. Tell them to talk about a specific time, how they felt about what happened, how they thought about it, and something they wanted the other person to stop doing or start doing, and then check in with them. Then finally, if needed, convene a group meeting with ground rules. Right? So that would be the last thing you did rather than the first. And look, you can solve their problems. You can get them to talk to each other. And all that means is that the next time you'll be doing that again. And you want to teach them what we all are learning here together about conflict resolution. So give it a try and let me know how it goes. All right, let's have another 1 minute at the microphone about who offers the feedback. And this speaks very much to the situation that we were just talking about. Do I mediate or do I allow the team to carry a message? Okay, here we go. We have a nurse on the team that is currently in a CRNA school. I have found that she does an excellent job excellent on her job in the transport team, but most recently does not go above and beyond for her coworkers or really thinks about them at all. Her downtime is spent doing homework for school. I frequently redirect her to assist the team in downtime tasks, but it's frequently met with a lot of huffs and puffs. I will need to speak with her very soon about this, as it's become a very heated topic that not one staff member has yet to discuss this with her directly. They say they do not feel it will change anything. I'm hoping if I discuss with her how this is making her teammates feel, she may not be recognizing the impact on the team and want to put more effort into helping others. I just want her to be aware of the situation and be given the opportunity to change their behavior. Do you feel this is the best way to handle this situation? She wants to ask all of you, as many do not want to discuss it with her personally. Or should I again encourage them to discuss this with her? So we're going to take a couple of minutes to reflect. And then I want to ask you to raise your hand and let's take a look at you and hear your voice. What's your best advice? Should this manager carry the message that not one staff member has yet expressed to her? Or should she have this be peer-to-peer feedback? What are your thoughts? So let's take a moment to reflect. Take a couple minutes to reflect. As soon as you have a thought, go to the raise your hand function in the chat box, or raise your hand, and hopefully we can see you.
Okay, our first hand raise comes from Doug.
All right, well, I think that there's probably a reason that the peers have not spoken to this person. So this might be someone that's relatively unapproachable or has made clear that her priority is her schoolwork. And I mean, there are a lot of details about the situation that you know, we won't infer, I'm just guessing there, but in this case, I think this should go to leadership, because to me, the expectation is when you're here to work, you're not here for schoolwork. So if you have time when you can get to that, that's great. But if you're leaving other things undone, not participating in teamwork because you're prioritizing your schoolwork, then that's a problem. So I think that the leader should meet with this person and really outline that either you're really engaged, and then when there's just nothing to do, you do your work, or there's just a broad policy of there's no schoolwork while you're here. Because it sounds like she's really abusing, you know, people have given her an inch out of courtesy and she's turned it into a mile.
Absolutely. And I'm really interested in your assessment, because the way, Doug, the way that you're viewing it, that occurs to me is that this is actually an issue about expectations versus, and more powerfully about expectations than how this is affecting other people. And so what you suggest is to bring the expectation of you're here to work, not do your schoolwork. And I want to break this down a little further with your good advice. You would be most effective if you said something like, yesterday when I redirected you to do X during your downtime, whatever she did, you rolled your eyes or you said you were busy with your schoolwork. And then this was frustrating to me because when you're here, my expectation is that you're here to work. So going forward, you know, when you're here, this is what I would expect. So rather than taking it on like every time somebody comes to you, you say, I'm doing homework, she'll say, no, I don't. Pick one time, Doug, when you came, if you came to her and said, would you do this? And got told, well, I'm doing schoolwork. That way you can really zero in on the behavior. So thank you for that thought. One really strong perspective here is let the manager handle it. It's all about expectations, right? Okay, we had another hand up, I think.
Yes, we have two more. Nancy.
Okay.
There you go. Hi. So my thought is, if no one is willing to approach her, there must be something more going on. So to address that, but also to use this as an opportunity to be the role model for the staff about, you know, what you want them to do. So if you see her studying in the hallway, that you approach her and say, this isn't the time for studying. Can you go do this patient, you know, call light or whatever it is? And then the staff learn how to approach her in a respectable manner, but then having those follow-up conversations in private with your expectations. And then also you could work on coaching her about your peers, you know, don't want to approach you. What else is going on? You know, I don't think this is how you want to be perceived.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, and I want to go through a bit of it. Like Doug, Nancy, you're thinking maybe there's something bigger going on here that both affects her need to do schoolwork and the fact that her teammates seem to be kind of circling around her just a little bit. And so keeping that in mind, what is that possibility? And then the second thing that you talked about is a very important issue and a very slippery slope. So you raise the issue, I can set an example. The challenge is, can you set an example without shaming her? So instead of saying, can you quit doing your schoolwork? I need you to do this. You come up to her and say, I need you to do X. And she says, I'm doing my homework. Then you just simply repeat, I need you to do X. And people will see you doing that and see how it goes. That you don't in public take on what you suggested that you do in private, which is the larger conversation about expectations. So it might be that you ask her to do something during the downtime and she says, oh, I got a test tomorrow. And you say, yeah, it's hard to study for those things, and not but, and I want you to do whatever it was you asked. Then later, maybe if this happens once or twice, then you're having the conversation that you suggested, the follow-up. Yesterday when I asked you to do whatever it was, you said you had a test and I suggested you go ahead with it. This is something that needs to be the way we roll here. When you're at work, you're at work. Okay, so thank you for those several suggestions, and we can really build on those. And
we have Grant.
Yes. Hello. I also agree with what Doug and Nancy brought forward. Very well put. Additionally, I would like to guide the employee, because it sounds like she does excellent work at her job. So maybe a strong performer at one time, or just maybe school's getting in the way. But to have that conversation in private about her schoolwork and guide her to the realization what that looks like to other employees.
okay,
And just set it up like that so that she can tell me and maybe come to the realization, oh, I'm seeing the other point of view now, how this looks like when I'm not there supporting my employees, and how could this would be, I would be frustrated if that was happening to me. So getting her to that realization, kind of taking that approach.
yeah, and Grant, what you're suggesting is this great invitation to empathy and that sense of insight about how other people see you. And you have two things in there. One is, I think there's the implication that maybe you want to have a support conversation, like, boy, this is a hard time, trying to get your schoolwork done and being at work. How are you managing that? What's the best way for you to manage that so you don't have to do it at work? And, yesterday, and again, I'd be really specific, yesterday when we asked you to do what, and you said, I'm studying, this meant that other people on the team had to do what I asked you to do. If you put yourself in their shoes, how do you think this seemed to them? And that's exactly what you're asking, is to invite her to imagine how her behavior looks to someone else. And that can be a really powerful way of getting her to step into that moment. Yeah. So thank you for that, Grant. Thank you, all of you. Some great ideas here with these challenging situations. All right, so there's another piece here about a technique for managing conflict, and that has to do with avoiding the toxic trap of negative gossip. And this is our seventh idea. And gossip is just an exchange where you're making judgments and the person isn't there. That, the person you're talking about or people you're talking about aren't in the room. One of your colleagues in a previous leadership lab gave this great acronym, and she said, T, is it the truth? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind? And if the answer is no to any of these, then it should not be shared. I want to refer you to a terrific article in Organizational Dynamics that's on this slide. I can just hear Marvin Gaye in my head, about, I heard it through the grapevine, and aspects about what happens at work. And I want to guide you to some suggestions about how to redirect a gossip. I have been collecting these in my classes in graduate school and nurse administration and PhD programs, and also on these leadership laboratories. So these are some, when someone tries to gossip around you, as mentioned earlier, you want to be the role model, but you don't want to be the person, who says prissily, I don't gossip. So here are some different ways that I have collected and I have used to redirect gossip. One, focus on content. Why do you think that? Focus on the positives. I remember one student saying when someone comes with some negative gossip about a team member and trying to triangulate, they simply say, I can really count on her when I need help. In other words, offer a positive slant on that. Then perspective. And that is, in a way, what Grant was getting at, in the sense you're asking someone to have some empathy. So you're gossiping about someone, oh, look, someone really blew up with Mrs. Rutherford and her family. Well, why do you think he might have done that or said that? Now that gets away from the gossip and toward the understanding of the behavior. Then you can say, and this is borderline prissy, but I've had to say it. It's fun to kid around, but I get uncomfortable when we talk about people who aren't here to defend themselves, right? And ultimately, if someone is continually giving you information about someone, you can simply talk about the relationship. It sounds like what he or she is doing has made you question whether you can trust them. Maybe you could find a way to discuss this. And again, get back to that situation of moving people toward each other. And finally, our 8th communication technique, I think you had a little video and a handout. One of the things that I've found, and I know that you have too, is that so many times we have in conflicts, particularly in a meeting, that comes down to people having a different perspective about the way that they typically, or their habits of mind of thinking. And that we tend to stick to a different perspective, or as Edward de Bono, who's the world's foremost thinker and writer about creative thought, has alerted us to the fact that there are 6 thinking hats. And one gives the overview, another gives the facts, another is an emotional point of view, another assesses risks, another assesses positive benefits, and another brings up the new and provocative. And for most of us, we tend to wear 1 or 2 hats most of the time. And we also get lazy in meetings and know that certain people will bring up certain perspectives, like, well, I can always count on, Tad to bring up the risks involved and how we might get sued. And so we get lazy about looking at a conflict from all different perspectives. So let me just walk through this with you very quickly. And then I want to hear how this struck you, how you thought this is helpful, what you think you might learn from it. Blue hat. We need the blue hat. We need every single one of these hats. The blue hat is the overview. Keeps us on agenda, what we've done, what we do next, how well have we done it, how do you sum it up? Blue hat keeps the conversation on track. I remember sitting through interminable faculty meetings, and I was always so grateful to one of my colleagues to wear the blue hat, and she would say, she'd look at her phone, it's 12:22 and we've got 2 more items on our agenda. That's blue hat, right? So those of you who are blue hat, think about that. We need you to keep us on track. Then the white hat, information. We need information. What information do we have? What do we need? What's missing? I put stars around how much will it cost, because that's what often happens is people get excited and enthused about an idea. And there's typically someone who will say, yeah, but it's too expensive. We can't afford it. Or what are our questions? Do we have information? Is this a belief or a fact? We need the facts. We do need to know how much it's going to cost. And yet, if that's the only hat that we put on, or the only hat that you wear, or letting just one person in the group always ask how much it's going to cost, you don't have that full discussion, and people sort of ossify or petrify into wearing this hat and dealing with conflict in the same way every time. Then there's the emotional view. What are my feelings? Am I angry or frustrated? What's my gut feeling? What's my first impression? We need the emotional view. And I would tell you that the red hat and the white hat usually get into it, that someone will say, this is such an exciting idea. If we can bring shared governance to this team, we're really going to be able to know each other so much better. And then the white hat will go, well, yeah, but we're going to have a consultant, and it's going to be really expensive. And then the red hat will just dig in. Yeah, but I can just feel how great it would be if we all had agency and we were participating in this together. And then the black hat comes in. risk assessment. We need caution. We need to know the downsides. We need to know the risks. We need to know what will happen if we take action, or how our patients or stakeholders or colleagues will react. So black hat and white hat tend to kind of gang up on the red hat. Okay, look, I know you're really excited about this, but it's a really risky venture. And then there's always do I smell a lawsuit here? We need to know that. And yet we can't allow the same person to bring it up. And if you are that person, you probably need to try on another hat from time to time. Then we have the yellow hat. This is the positive. This is so great. We've got good points. This is so preferable to other things. These are the good things that are going to happen. These are the benefits. How do we put it into action? So positive. And often the yellow hat and the red hat just really want to drive it through. I can just picture this. It's going to make such a difference. There are so many benefits to having shared governance. It's so emboldening. It's so empowering. Let's put this into action. And then you're going to have the black hat coming in, but what about this? And the white hat coming in, well, is that a belief or a fact? And then we have the green hat. And often the green hat will listen very quietly. And after the blue hat has summed everything up, the green hat will say, well, could we do this in a different way? Or I've listened to the whole thing, but what are our other alternatives? Or who has a new idea? Or is there another explanation here? Or another green hat, which I love to do when there's a conflict and people are saying, I don't know how we're ever going to solve this, is to ask the group to put on a green hat and ask, what's the worst way to handle this? And so if you're having a problem with gossip, ask the group, well, how can we get people to gossip more? And they'll start coming up with ideas and they'll start laughing. And by being provoked in this way, they will come up with some really great ideas. So we need the green hat. We need all of the hats. So I want you to think for a moment about what you learned by looking at the video. If you haven't looked at it, go back. It's a short one that really brings these concepts home. What do you learn about conflict when you look at the fact that we often wear the same hat, and that the best decisions in conflict are made by all of the hats being present? And so what insights about conflict did you gain from this 6-hat idea? And how could it help you understand or cope with conflict on your team? So will you take a moment and reflect about that and write in the chat box how this has provided you with some insight about conflict, about your own behavior in a conflict, or how it might help you going forward. What did you learn from the 6-hat method? So let's go into the chat and see what you have to say about that. Ramsey, do you have the 6 hats posted on the wall of your office, or was that another message? It's not bad to post that on your wall. Sometimes I need to wear other hats and make sure that all hats are represented. I have a team member always wearing the black hat. I'd like her to try and view things from another color hat. I actually thought, do I have all the hats represented? No, this is the think before you speak. Okay, thank you, Ramsey, for clarifying that. Okay, that sense, that's the question. Do I have all the hats represented? And sometimes I ask everybody to go red hat. And so we see what happens there. All perspectives are important, helps with brainstorming, helps foster diversity of thought. And I think one of the really easy ways to go about this, and so many nurse leaders have done this, show your team the video, give them the handout, have a discussion about it, because then you can share the vocabulary of shorthand. And so many teams now will go, you know what? I think we might need a little black hat here. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, or, oh boy, everybody's asking how much it could cost. Can we get a little yellow hat here? Let's talk about, or we're talking too much black hat. What if this worked? What if it was wonderful, right? And so being able to, as some of you are putting it, have each person have their viewpoint, the hats balance the group, and keeping the group on the same page by trying different perspectives. Okay, so we are just about at the end of our time here. And so I want to ask you, as I always do, of the different approaches and particularly of the tools, which do you think you want to try and apply in your practice going forward? Untangling assumptions, training people how to treat you, mirroring listening dialogue, the DERE model, tackling the triangle, curtailing negative gossip, searching for common ground, or 6 hats. So which one really struck you and you think, you know, we always say, please try this at home. I mean, this is the essence of the leadership laboratory. So what do you want to try at home? Let's have a look here. Tackle the triangle, 6 hats, DERE model, a little closer, train people how to treat me, more of that. Training people how to treat you, mirroring dialogue, DERE, mirroring dialogue, tackle the triangle, DERE, curtailing negative gossips, negative gossip, 6 hats, great tools, 6 hats, tackle the triangle, curtailing negative gossip. I never heard of the 6 hats. This is something I will try out. Think, and that is the acronym about gossip. Okay, so do take these forward, experiment with them, and pass on what you've learned for your team. It gives a kind of a wonderful shorthand in what you've talked about, training people how to treat you. And finally, I want to wish you happy Halloween by encouraging you to vote. And I want to thank you so much for being so generous and like really on the button in our first ever Zoom Leadership Laboratory. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for your thoughts, for your ideas, for your feelings, for, I guess I'm trying to get in all the 6 hats here, and look forward to seeing you next time. Be well, take good care. Thanks so much. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, everyone. If your name is not in the participant list in the way that I can recognize it, please type it in the chat so that I'm able to give you attendance. And thank you so much. I enjoyed participating on Zoom. Have a great week.